The gaming industry has been around for quite some time now, and as such has changed a lot. Once upon a time, you'd rarely, if ever, get a game made by an independent developer, but now they're more or less a dime a dozen. And I love that, because indie games have proven time and time again to be titles driven on passion for the medium. Games by fans for fans, making for tons and tons and tons of excellent titles, only 10 of which we'll be talking about today. Let me tell you, this was not an easy list to make, as the more games I played, the more the order shifted, and I ended up with a multitude of titles that I wanted to include, yet couldn't. There are so many damn good indies, but if I had to narrow it down to 10, I think this is what I'd go with. Before we get started, there are a couple things I'd like to go over. Firstly, I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Renegade Master's fantastic countdown on the very same subject, as this is what inspired me to make the video in the first place. It's very well done, plus he and I have very different selections on the list, meaning even more excellent recommendations and content at that. So give that a watch, and please don't get mad at me if your favorite didn't make the list. I'm sensitive. Not to mention, there are too many good indies to play. I had to stop at some point. Second, how am I going to define what is and isn't an indie game? For me anyway, it's a title made by a single person or a small team without major support from larger companies. I'm willing to bend the rules a bit if a larger company helps to publish a game, as that's more so done to get the game in stores and whatnot, rather than being a part of the creative process. I think that's about all I wanted to cover though, so why delay the inevitable any further? I've got lots of games to talk about today, many of which for the first time, so grab yourself a delicious, refreshing glass of water and get all nice and cozy, because we're talking about my top 10 favorite indie games. Hey, what's going on? Why does it say? Oh. Yeah, that makes sense. So for those of you who are new to the channel, first off, welcome. It's great to have you here. I hope you like what you see and maybe even stick around. But for those of you who are regulars, I'm sure you're well aware of my immense, unconditional, borderline annoying affection for Gunvolt 2. For the sake of keeping things interesting, I'm gonna not make this game number 1, but number 0. Why? Because as a content creator, I have to subvert expectations. We all saw it coming, but I gotcha! Ha! Also, this makes room for one more game I wouldn't have been able to talk about otherwise, so it's all good, gamers. Anyway, what does this game do to deserve praise so high that not even number 1 in a top 10 does it justice? Well, it has a fairly engaging story, it's gorgeous in its HD remasters running at a rock-solid 60 FPS with detailed pixel art that's a feast for the eyes, and has the most responsive controls I've ever experienced for its 2 playable characters, both of which providing their own spins on the risk-reward gameplay that incentivizes mastery of the mechanics with goodies that raise the skill ceiling and J-pop, the best reward you could possibly give me ever. It's got interesting level design, involved in challenging boss fights, secrets aplenty, and tons of replayability. I love this game, and if you somehow didn't already know that, well, now you do. Alright, gushing about Gunvolt 2, check. Just need to throw in a reminder to drink water and pointlessly bring up the Tales franchise, and we'll have ourselves a ZaffreRevolution video. With my indie games journey, one series that's always eluded me is Shantae. I tried a bit of the first game a while back, and I mean, it was a solid 8 out of 10, which seems to be the general consensus. I was recommended to go ahead and play Shantae and the Pirate's Curse since that's apparently the best one, and yeah, this one was a little better. Okay, a lot better. This game was awesome. I had a great time, and I'm happy to report that I wasn't disappointed in the slightest. Even though I was jumping in as someone who skipped the first 2 games in the series, this narrative was pretty easy to follow and a lot of fun at that. Shantae and her nemesis Risky have to team up in order to defeat the mysterious Pirate King, simple enough. But the writing was hilarious, feeling like something I'd see in a cartoon, very witty and full of charm, carrying what would be a decent story into great territory. The characters also lent a hand in raising the story's quality, given that they're all incredibly likable. Shantae is a great lead, and I thought people were only into her due to her being such a well-rounded character, but now I see that people are into her because she's a well-rounded character, and that's great. The sprite work was pretty good, and the music was excellent, but the gameplay was what pulled me in. Like I stated in previous videos, I'm still very much a noob when it comes to the Metroidvania genre, but this is a great example of doing the formula right from what I can tell. Gaining new abilities and using them to come back to older areas and discover new upgrades for my character was a great feeling. Said upgrades all felt seamless and responsive, so it's gonna be hard to go to the other entries, where these are either saved for extra modes or are just straight up non-existent, because I can't imagine the game playing as smoothly as it does without them. Areas all had something about them to be distinct and memorable, making for an unforgettable experience, encouraging me to see as much of it as possible and take the splurge to become Shantae trash already. And you know what? After the great time that was Pirate's Curse, I don't know. It just might. Did somebody say mood whiplash? Hyperlite Drifter was a game I've only gotten recommended a handful of times, but in every instance, it'd be with the utmost praise. I thought it was going to be trapped in backlog hell, but man, am I glad that wasn't the case. This is a brilliant, one-of-a-kind experience that, while short, will make an impact. The sprite art is unbelievable and in motion is a sight to behold. Combined with its hypnotizing color palette, this is one of the prettiest games on the list without question. And that ambient soundtrack to go with it sets the perfect atmosphere and tone for the game you're about to experience in every moment forward. The game's presentational value ends up being very important as Hyperlite Drifter sets out to deliver a story and tons of lore without a single word of dialogue, leaving a lot of room for moments to be left up to interpretation and environmental storytelling. It's really creative, and I've rarely seen other games do something quite like this, especially in the current day and age. The game plays like a 2D Zelda, at least that's what I'm told since I don't really play Zelda nor am able to properly compare the two, but with a heavy emphasis on combat. When you're not exploring these environments, you're fighting enemies in the area or looking for a way to fight the enemy of the area, and the game gives you plenty of options to come out on top. You want to use them all too, trust me, because yeah, this game's hard. So hard, but that challenge is one of my favorite parts about the game. I love a good test of skill, and the game wants you to be paying attention at all times and figure out how to overcome the obstacles ahead of you. And in between battles, I have a variety of intriguing landscapes to explore, making for excellent pacing between balls-to-the-wall intense battles and peaceful, thought-provoking exploration, wondering what this particular location's story is. It's quite the journey, a short one at that, but quality undeniably took priority over quantity when it came to making this game. There are a couple of games that I've got a weird relationship with. I can go on to list dozens upon dozens of problems with them, then proceed to state that I love them regardless, and Freedom Planet is one of those games. The physics are inconsistent, the story feels incomplete and rushed, the dialogue is cringe in many aspects, and levels can go on for far too long the further you get into the game. Yet at the same time, it's so damn charming and fun that I managed to play it multiple times while enjoying myself. What drew me in was the way it pays homage to classic Sonic, as those games are some of my favorite 2D platformers that I've played hundreds of times and will continue to do so. No, I don't have a problem. Like I've already said, the physics weren't exactly how I would have preferred, but the game has a larger focus on exploration and combat rather than high speed anyway, so it works here. Levels are gigantic, which has proven to be an issue in some instances, but if anything, it adds replay value as the game has a lot to offer for those who want to replay its stages again and again for those faster times. And you have 3 playable characters to choose from if you do find the itch to go back. Lilac will always be my favorite though. I found the game to be at its peak with her gameplay style personally. She's also my favorite character in the story as, even though it's a pretty meh narrative, at least its cast is entertaining if nothing else. Carol and Mila, Lord of all Spirits, were awesome co-stars, all of which having perfectly suited voices. Yeah, this game is fully voiced, and it's like they knew how ridiculous the story was, so they went over the top, and it made every scene just a bit more bearable. And that soundtrack, dear god, it's one of the best ones on the list for being melodic and energetic. The game's issues keep it from being a bit higher than the number 8 spot, but the elements I do enjoy make it crack my top 10 regardless, and that's nothing to sneeze at. All this time later, the game still manages to find its way into my cold, dark, aching, ripped up, broken, empty void of a heart. Okay, maybe I do have a problem. Wow, the moon sure is pretty, huh? But man, what a horrible night to have a curse. A curse of the moon? Bloodstained Curse of the Moon is another one of NT's finest works, paying homage to the original Castlevania games, a series I have little experience with. Regardless, I enjoyed this game quite a lot and for many reasons. The 8-bit style graphics were a visual treat and the soundtrack has no right being this memorable, but the level design and game structure that delivers plenty of replay value are what raised this game from great to fantastic. Levels can be played in an incredibly linear fashion, but alternate paths prove to give new challenges and add a crazy amount of substance and depth to the game's wide assortment of levels, all based around the different characters' movement and abilities. There are 4 playable characters you can switch between on the fly, and using their abilities, there are plenty of secrets and optional routes to uncover. See a small opening on the ground? Change over to Miriam and Mega Man slide your way through. See a route that requires some magical protection? I go the other way because I don't care for Alfred. He was okay. This means no 2 playthroughs of the game have to be the same, and good thing too, because if you want the full story, you're gonna have to play through the game at least twice, with both playthroughs proving to be entirely different experiences, and you can go through the game even more due to there being a variety of other aspects to shake things up, such as playing the game solely as Zangetsu, only selecting a handful of characters to join you on your quest, Ultimate Mode, aka the best route in the game, so on and so forth. There's quite a bit to do. All of this quality and substance make for one of my favorite indie games without a doubt that was a blast the whole way through. speaking of Blast, Blaster Master Zero 2, baby! I played and fell in love with both Blaster Master Zero games earlier this year, with this one being my favorite of the two by just a bit. It's a side-scrolling top-down hybrid adventure game structured in the style of a Metroidvania that sounds incredibly weird and unconventional, but it works so damn well. The game is a space adventure, meaning you jump between planets for the major areas rather than being one connected overworld like the first game, and I feel this works a lot better than before because it reduces backtracking at a considerable rate. You will still revisit areas with abilities gained over the course of the game, but this is more so for optional content and to finish one side quest in particular in order to get this game's true ending. Said areas are varied and a lot of fun to traverse due to the involved level design, unique gimmicks, and great controls over both Jason and the tank he uses. The tank gets much cooler upgrades this time around that feel snappier and faster paced, which I enjoyed quite a bit. The same can be said for the top-down dungeon segments, as Jason has a slick counter mechanic, as well as a wider blaster variety that encourages proper timing and skillful use rather than just spamming the strongest one. Bosses were pretty great across the board, the story was surprisingly solid all the way to its satisfying conclusion, and additional DLC campaigns add replay value on top of everything else the game offers on its own. I gave this game a glowing recommendation and buckets full of praise in the previous video, and all of my thoughts on it still stand. It's a phenomenal entry, hence why it's in my top 10 at all. But why isn't it even higher? Honestly, I just like the other games more, so take this as a tone setter for how much I adore the top 5 from here on out. And don't let that detract anything at all from the thrill ride that is Blaster Master Zero 2. It's such a complete package through and through, culminating in a game I love. Almost as much as I love girls. Wait for it. River City Girls, that is. And other girls too. Ladies, please hit your boy up. I haven't played many WayForward games if you couldn't tell, but I doubt anything will match this one in my eyes. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. The beat 'em up genre isn't one I dabble in too much anymore, but there have been a handful of them that still manage to stick in my mind as excellent games, with this being one of the best. It has it all. A colorful cast of lovable characters due to the hilarious dialogue dripping with charm, all led by two great main characters, especially Kyoko, she was the best. Detailed and stylized graphics on all fronts, from the masterful sprite work and animations to the wonderfully illustrated character portraits and even manga-esque cutscenes. Oh, and did I mention that the game is fully voiced? Can I get a hell yeah? There are a lot of my favorite voice actors who took part in bringing this world to life, and the way so many lines are delivered brought a smile to my face. This is such a fun tale to see through until the end. And guys, this game's music has no right being as good as it is. Special shoutouts to the vocal tracks, which all have a vibe I miss with so heavily it's not even funny. The combat feels so tight and responsive, so much more so than this genre typically provides. This is undeniably thanks to the game being inspired by Arc System Works' fighting game titles, giving the game an identity all its own. Combos are highly encouraged, and with as many options as you're given, there's tons of room for growth both by your character's skill set increasing and your own skills as you learn the mechanics. There's so much you can do, and you always feel the weight and impact of each attack. Not to mention there's a good amount of defensive and evasive maneuvers, making for involved fights the whole way through that rarely feel cheap. And if you've got a partner to play with, much like beat 'em ups tend to do, the game becomes even more fun, but the game would have easily made it this high based on my solo playthrough alone. It's that good. I improved a lot, I laughed a lot, and I nearly completed the thing. Needless to say, this was a great time, and I've yet to grow tired of hopping back in for another playthrough or two. For the final 2D platformer of the list, we have another excuse for me to gush about Celeste! Huzzah! Celeste is a masterclass on how to make good-ass video games, because not only is it so good at everything it sets out to do, but it also meshes those aspects together to create something wholly unique and impactful. The game in its simplest is a struggle to reach the top of the mountain, but the mountain itself makes for manifestations of the protagonist, Madeline's inner struggles and insecurities. She wants to overcome them, but she constantly fails over and over again. You, the player, constantly fail at the game's obstacles, over and over again, but you both keep at it. You both look at the challenges ahead, take a deep breath, and try multiple times until you finally get it right. It's so good, and with a soundtrack that makes the player feel a dozen different emotions, it's perfect for the game and a joy to listen to on its own. All that gooey, mushy crap aside, the game's level design and mechanics have a lot of depth and are competently put together so that the player is given enough to make it through the game's many stages. The formula is in the same style as Super Meat Boy, having these bursts of challenges, but taken a lot further. In the game's epilogue chapter, I do think it's taken a little too far, as that's still one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my gaming career, but I never felt too frustrated because the game always takes notice of your failure and says, hey man, it's okay, we can always try again later. The game wants you to win, which is apparent not only because of the heartfelt messages, but the wide catalog of options to make the game more accessible for those who struggle with it too much. Hell, the game even wants you to be proud of your death count because it's not a representation of how much you failed, but how much you persevered. I freaking love that. It's because of all this that I felt inclined to get all the strawberries and crystal hearts, nearly completing the game. Not the golden strawberries though, screw Screw that noise. Celeste is a beautiful game in and out, and is the one game on this list that I can recommend without hesitation, knowing fully well that you'll find some sort of enjoyment with it. Motherforking Crosscode. I went into this game with little to no expectations and came out with a new favorite. Crosscode is so bloody fantastic. Good God. It's an action RPG, which you already know I'm all over, and a damn good one at that. The story takes a little bit to get going, but this time was used to develop a cast full of characters that forced their way into my heart. And with the characters being the most important part of a game's story for me, I couldn't care less if the whole game was just about vibing in the in-game MMO. I would still enjoy myself. But I am glad that there was a plot of some sort because it was pretty clean. The game's stylized pixel art has so much detail and love poured into every crevice, character, and location. And my dudes, the soundtrack is so good! The gigantic overworld remained a joy to explore over the entire 40-hour journey due to it being layered, non-linear, and chock full of secrets and optional areas, with there being even more to uncover if you decide to indulge in the piles of side quests, those of which manage to stay varied and engaging, something even a few of my favorite RPGs struggle with. Combat has many different techs and options to utilize, from the genius skill system and emphasis on equipment. You never have to grind, you just gotta sharpen your skill and make sure your gear is up to date, which the game will let you know about should you happen to fall behind. When you're not fighting and reach one of the game's many dungeons, you'll be challenged by the intricate puzzles that test you on the new areas you're given over the game. This all makes for a challenging game in more ways than one, but taking note from its indie brethren, it gives options to alleviate said challenge in order to make it all more accessible. This level of polish and content is akin to a AAA title, and it's a $20 game made by a small team. Talk about next level! Crosscode blew me away, and despite me playing it fairly recently, after sitting on it for a while, yeah, it's earned its spot all the way up here without question. I love Mega Man Battle Network. It's one of my favorite spin-offs for the Blue Bomber. I love the games, I love the anime, I love the manga. Anything this series did, I was all over it. Thankfully, it was one of the few spin-offs to properly conclude in the way it wanted to, which is awesome, but I won't lie and say that I am sad to have it gone even all this time later. I just want one more game like it. One more game taking its fast-paced grid-based battle system to the extreme in the best way possible. And so God said, let there be one step from Eden. Holy freaking crap, this game is in a league of its own. One Step from Eden came out at the beginning of this year, and I've been hooked ever since, playing it more than I'd like to admit. My playtime would be even higher if I didn't have this stupid channel to make content for, but I digress. This was my first roguelite I've experienced, and one that feels tailor-made for my taste specifically. I kid you not, I love everything about this game. The story is entirely in the background, featuring a simple premise. The world is destroyed with only one safe haven remaining. Get there. But there's just enough bits of dialogue and circumstances that come up that make you ask so many questions. How did the world get to this state? How do these two know each other? Where did Eden come from? What the hell is the shopkeeper's deal, and why is she so creepy and awesome? It all has no bearing on the game whatsoever, but it's so fun to think about regardless. Anyway, on to the stuff that actually matters. This is another game with masterful pixel art and smooth animations, all made to run at 60 frames per second. Well, the Switch version can struggle a bit when things get more involved. But in other news, did you know the sky's blue? The music is outstanding, being memorable and invigorating to help me make it through the nail-bitingly difficult gameplay. This may just be one of the hardest games I've played in my entire life, but for all the right reasons. Enemies are aggressive and smart, but telegraph their attacks well and are able to be figured out and exposed in order to come out on top. Not to mention, the further you get in your run, the more powerful you become, and if you set up your build just right, it's insane the amount of things you can do. The bosses are all so gosh darn involved and frantic, and all of which are able to be fought in a variety of different orders, scaling with how far you are in your run. They also make up the 9 playable characters in this game. They're so fun to play as too, providing their own spins on the same gameplay style, meaning that there's bound to be someone who clicks with you above the rest. There are hundreds of unlockable attacks and buffs to use through the game, additional cosmetics and movesets for nearly every character, 3 different final bosses depending on some actions you take over the course of your run, secrets on secrets on secrets to uncover, making for an ungodly amount of replayability. Why is this game so good? Why is this game so good? I've been itching, begging for some excuse to rave about this game because all this time later, it still got me in its hooks and has no intention on stopping. I haven't even seen everything this game has to offer all this time later, and it's refused to let up on the challenge department. Good God, I love this game. And it boggles my mind to think that something like this still wasn't enough to reach the #1 spot, which just begs the question, if One Step from Eden isn't the one, then what the hell is? It's been too long. far too long since I got to talk about just how special this game is to me. Valhalla is my favorite indie game, and one of my favorite games, period. This is a cyberpunk bartender simulator where you play as Jill, mix drinks, and change lives. You spend about 95% of the game just on this one screen, making orders and reading up on all the patrons' dialogue, and this is honestly why I have a hard time recommending the game. There's no real plot to it or goal to set anything in motion. You're just following the game's protagonist as she chats with a variety of personalities and maybe open up to others herself, meaning so much of Valhalla hinges on its characters. But truth be told, that's exactly why I love it. Never before have I read dialogue as realistic sounding as this game. Every character has so much to them, and it's easy to tell even with this small peek into all of their lives. I found myself caring for just about every single one of them, and I loved listening to their stories and opinions on many of the world's different rules, events, and technological advancements. The protagonist, Jill, is one of my favorite characters ever written, and one I see a lot of myself in, not just because of how she talks and interacts with others, but what she struggles with. Her past, fear of being vulnerable with others, and even financial struggles. She's literally me if I were a super attractive anime girl, so yes, I'm biased, but, you know, so is this whole list. The vibe of this title is so cozy and chill that the game sold me solely on its aesthetic, and the mesmerizing soundtrack is my favorite across the entire indie gaming board. Despite the game's incredibly linear structure, it still manages to have a lot of replay value. How you interact with specific characters helps determine whether or not you get certain ending scenes once the game concludes. Not to mention what drinks you give patrons can change up their dialogue to the point where you'll miss out on a crap ton of additional content should you only play through this game once. Figuring out what drink combinations trigger what and getting characters drunk was so much fun and added even more depth to a surprisingly deep game. The whole way through, it never stresses you out, telling you right from the start that this is a game to relax with, encouraging you to get comfortable and just enjoy the ride. This in turn makes the game have a lack of challenge or any real skill mastery, two aspects that contribute to make many of my favorite games, let alone favorite indie games. But I simply did not care about all that here. I just wanted to chill and talk with all these characters. I just wanted to find out more about Jill. I just wanted to continue being immersed in this relaxing, cozy visual novel. This is such a laid-back, short experience that doesn't attempt to do much, but what it does attempt to do, it excels at like nothing else. At the end of the day, this was a game for me that honestly came at the perfect time in my life. And even booting it up now, hell, just when thinking about it, I get this unexplainable, spine-tingling feeling that really anything does for me anymore. What does that say when it comes to my feelings toward this game? This was the right choice. Valhalla is the #1 spot on my list, just as it so rightfully deserves.